Here's how it will go throughout this session. So I'll first start introduction to Flutter, like it's a UI framework, we know that, but like what it does and how it works. Then we'll move on to a small course on Flutter. So this would give you an, say you're coming in from web development, or like you have no experience with any development so far. So this would set like the foundation of how Flutter works, how do you build applications in it. And then lastly we'll move on to building a small not as such a project, but we'll start off by building a new Flutter app, and we'll see how that turns out. And lastly we'll conclude it off with what projects you can become a Flutter developer, and I can take up any questions around internships based on my experience working with Flutter, and any other questions have related to the framework. So with that said, we'll dive in a little bit about I am working as developer advocate at 100ms. It's a audio video SDK company. We help folks like you, developers, integrate audio video into their apps. I also make YouTube videos. I have around 9,000 subscribers right now, and 1,500 plus Discord community where usually Flutter developers we continue to talk about Flutter. And I've previously been a speaker. I've spoken at Flutter Vikings, Google I/O Extended, and such. But something that I'm really proud of is being a contributor. I contribute to open source projects like the Flutter Community Plus plugins and the Flutter Fire repository, which is like Flutter, and it helps you integrate Firebase into your Flutter apps. So I've been a contributor to those repositories. With that said, like I'll jump right in quickly. So a lot of the time that you spend on your mobile phone is largely on either an application, like you're either using YouTube to learn something, or maybe connecting on social media and such. But the time that you spend is more on the mobile app, browser, visiting web pages. This is one reason we should be thinking about developing for mobile phones or mobile smartphones. And two major operating systems that generally are there on mobile iOS. So you will either have a Android mobile device or a iOS, Apple iPhone. When you're starting out, thinking about building applications, generally people tend to start out with the Android side of things. They'll build out an application that is in Java, and then you can put this application up on Play Store. So the people there can download it on their Android mobile device and use this application. But there are also people that have iPhones, and you want them to be able to use your application. So when I first started building out applications, I was using something called gdevelop. It would build applications for Android, and I would put them on Play Store. But the problem was that a lot of my friends who had iPhones couldn't use these applications. And then there are also times when you need to build web applications, like maybe a building app and you are shipping it out. You want to be able to show before people download it, so a landing page sort of thing. Flutter comes in here. So for early age startups that are trying to build their applications, Flutter is the solution to go ahead with. They can quickly build their applications for multiple operating systems. It As of now, Flutter helps you build applications for mobile. You can build for Android and iOS using Flutter. Apps for web, you can use Flutter. And even if you want to build for desktops, so this includes three other operating systems, which is Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And for that too, you can build Flutter. You can build apps. So these are like the 6 platforms that you can build applications on. And here is why it is important. So as a developer, you can manage your applications for all these 6 different platforms using just one project if you wish to. And that gives you advantage when it comes to business. The same underlying code can be used across operating systems to build apps. For startups or for founders, this means that there are less teams to manage. You can just have one team of Flutter developers instead of having like separate teams for iOS, for Android. And for developers, it means like a higher efficiency, they are building out for all these two different operating systems. They can quickly see the changes on screen because of features like high velocity development. Flutter has an expressive toolkit, so you can build out these immersive experience on a mobile device. You can take control of every pixel on screen. And lastly, the experience for the end would always be similar to how it is on a native Android and iOS apps. Doesn't make sense. Like if it goes just above the head, I just want to say like Flutter is a cross-platform framework. So building for all these different platforms is possible using Flutter. It is a big advantage because less teams to manage, less code to write, hopefully. And lastly, there are a lot of features when it comes to the development experience. As you write code, you can quickly see changes on screen, which isn't as possible with other frameworks right now. Lastly, even beyond these six different flat platforms, Flutter can be used to build out for embedded devices. And this particular example is by Roman, who is a Google developer expert for Flutter. So he's used a LED screen he got off Alibaba, and then he has built out an ID card. So this is a video. While I haven't put the video on my presentation, but you can watch it on his Twitter. And what it basically does is like for when he's going to a conference, the ID card is something that people can interact with, touch it and swipe through it. So this is also completely built out with Flutter. This is another example of Flutter being used on Wear OS. So Wear OS is for watches, and Renan built out a game that he's running using Flutter on his watch, which is like out to show that Flutter can be used for unconventional devices as well. And beyond this, like with this introduction, I just hope like it makes sense. Why should we be talking about Flutter? So Flutter is this cross-platform framework, six different platforms, highly advantageous. It can be used for devices that can further what you can build with Flutter. And talking about this again, like this is a small giveaway since I am talking about Flutter at a lot of events today. So to help you with your journey, it would help like giving away two courses in collaboration with a friend. So we're doing two courses in Flutter Bootcamp, which would give away, and I will talk about this in the presentation further. But we'll start off by creating a new Flutter application, and as we jump right into it, I want you to first take you to the flutter.dev website, which is their official website to build out applications. And what you can do is the first time that you decide, okay, now Flutter is the framework that you want to go ahead with, uh, we'll go off to the get started and install the Flutter SDK. So depending on the operating system that you're on, let us say you're using a Windows device or you have a Mac OS device, you can select to install it. So Windows installation is very, the first step is downloading the SDK. So this comes up as a stable zip file, and you can download the Flutter SDK, add it to your path, like update the path, and you should have Flutter ready to go. The second thing that you'll need is a IDE. So you have to write IDE, and for that you can either use Android Studio, or if you are like already familiar with web development, if you're already a developer who prefers Visual Studio Code or VS Code, you can still go ahead with and use that as your IDE. So download the SDK, set it up on a device, and then either install Android Studio or Visual Studio Code for your for writing code in. So this setup, I would preferably recommend that after this session, if you decide to learn Flutter and go further in it, I would recommend you follow like a installation video that would help you set up Flutter. And the big challenge that I always tell in on my sessions with Flutter is the installation part. Like the installation part is sometimes it might like not fit your device, but installation is the first hurdle. If you cross it, Flutter is very relatively very easy to learn and build something out in. If you are on Mac OS, there is an installation guide here you can follow. And what I'll scroll down to is the example. So right now Flutter is being used by a lot of companies to build out their application. If you are using Google Pay for transactions, the the application itself is built out in Flutter. The Google Classroom app uses Flutter, and there is also a video on how PUBG used Flutter for their community communities part of it. Like they built out a module that helps people connect using Flutter. And there was Dream 11 used to use Flutter. Tencent again uses it. Philips Hue application is built out in Flutter, and ByteDance has a lot of things done out in Flutter. So the language, when it comes to Flutter development, the language that we use to write code is called Dart, and we'll also talk about Dart in a bit. But Dart.dev, if you're familiar with Java or any object-oriented programming language, Dart should be very easy to learn. So what you can do is go over to Dart.dev, go down to the, you would have something called a language tour. So this language tour covers like how Dart works, the basic part of it, like a basic Dart program. How do you write a Dart program? It has other things such as the built-in types that are available. How do you define a string? How do you input numbers, use numbers, the data types for that? And lastly, like functions and classes. How do you do that in Dart? But with any Flutter course, like if you'll take up any Flutter course, Dart would be covered in it, so you don't have to externally go out and learn Dart on your own to get started with Flutter. But when you are thinking about going into Flutter, Dart would be required, so it's generally recommended to have knowledge of Dart before starting to build out applications in Flutter. So before we dive into creating a new Flutter project, what I'll do is I'll quickly show this. So I have my terminal here, and I can quickly navigate to my desktop folder. Here I can run this command called flutter create. Flutter create followed by the name of your application that you are trying to build out. So for now, I'll just go ahead with new app. And as you run this command, Flutter would handle writing code for you. So it will create some files, and we'll also go through that project structure to see how that works. While we wait for this Flutter project creation to happen, what I'll do is I'll quickly return to my presentation, and I will take you through the Flutter crash course. So this Flutter crash course would give you like an overview. So let us, I saw like some of you are really beginner with development as such. So if you are in your first year, or thinking about starting out with Flutter, even if you have like some experience, if you have worked on web applications in the past, this should show you how the structure of things of how we do it in so the Flutter crash course, the first point of it is everything in Flutter is a widget. Now you can think of these widgets as Lego blocks. So you put one block on top of the other, and you'll have like a complete application built out. And what I mean by that is, like, as mobile developers or as someone trying to build an application with Flutter, this would be our framework. So we are talking about mobile development because Flutter, I feel, is more stable on mobile. You can build out applications on web, Mac OS too, which I would also run right now. But mobile is the first thing that Flutter was being used on. It was being used to build applications for both Android and iOS. So I'll take mobile as my major example. And as mobile developers, this would be your canvas or something that you are trying to put elements on. Let us say you work for a company and the manager there tells you add some text. So how would that work in Flutter? So in Flutter, as I mentioned, there are these widgets. You can think of widgets as classes. So in my case, I have like a text class. So the constructor would be something like text, and it takes in string data. And what I'll do is I'll type in text, open these two brackets, and I can tell it a value that I want to show on screen. So if you want to show some text on screen, type in text, open up the brackets and pass in the string value that you want to show, and this should render out something like hello Aditya on screen. So it will take that value that you passed it and it will show that on screen. Very simple. Similarly, let us say the same manager tells you add an image. So how would that work? For image 2 we have like a widget that you can use, so it again works something similar. In the previous example we were adding text, so we wrote in text. In this case we are adding an image, so we'll type in image, open the brackets and tell it the image we want to use. In our case we are using something called a network image because we are pulling it from the internet and we want to show it on screen, therefore we are using this network image. So now, you would ask me like, okay, this is cool. We use widgets. So do we have to learn all these widgets that, we have to use inside our Flutter application? Again, no, you don't have to learn all these widgets. You can go over to the same website, flutter. Go down to the documentation, and here you will have something called the widgets catalog. So this covers like all the widgets that are available to use. Let us say you wanted to add text to your application, as I mentioned, so you can go down to text widgets and you will find something called text option here. You can similarly see how to use this widget inside your application. So it again has text and then it's passing in the value that you want to show. Similarly, let us say you wanted to add like a image on screen, so you can go down to assets, images, and you will have the image widget here. So a lot of it is available in the documentation, and as a mobile developer, as you go on building applications, some of these would you'll memorize them and you'll just use them by instinct, so you don't have to learn them as such, and you can use image something like this. Coming back to the presentation again. So as mobile developers, like you'll often be not given like only just one widget to add. You could be asked to like replicate UI design. So this is the most common design that I hope we all are familiar with. So WhatsApp is a like majorly used application, and if you have to build out something like this, what I want you to visualize is like all the elements of this WhatsApp screen can be broken down into simpler elements. So let us say in the chart itself, you have like a image, profile image on the side of every person that you're talking to. And then they have like a text here. It's again a simple text. It's the title of your chat. And then maybe the last message that you're being sent. So you can see like all of these go on repeating one under the other as a list. Similarly, if other things on inside this example, so there is a app bar on top, the widgets or the individual elements go on repeating in a similar fashion as we go down. And then there is also another smaller widget or smaller element on the side, which is like a action button to create a new chart inside your WhatsApp application. So again, in Flutter, what we do is like we have only talked about single widget so far. uh, One widget can have the other widget as its child. So the upper widget, or the top one, would be called the parent, and the child would be called the child widget. And you can think of this whole structure as a tree. So you start off with one widget and then you give it another child, so you're laying that widget on top of it, and this way you'll go on building in a tree formation like your complete application. But a widget can also have multiple children. So one such widget that allows this is called column. So column is a layout widget, and what it does is it basically lets you put on multiple widgets on screen. And let us say you want to show like three text in a vertical fashion, so column would allow you to do that. It takes in a list of widgets and you can pass in three different text to it, so flutter, crash, course, and it would show that on screen as flutter, crash, course. Now if this doesn't make sense, what I want you to, everything in Flutter is a widget, so you are dealing with these widgets all the time. Number two, there are some widgets that let you show something on screen like a text widget or an image widget, but there are also widgets that let you lay out. So column as such doesn't do much, except laying out these text widgets on screen vertically. Again, you can go back to the documentation page itself and go down to something called layout to find this widget. So there is a column somewhere here. This is the column, and what it majorly does is lay out a list of child widgets in the vertical direction. Similarly, there is also called another widget called row, so it will let you lay out these widgets in a row or horizontal fashion. So this helps you do that. And lastly, to summarize, these widgets are the building blocks. You write the name of that widget, open bracket, and tell it like what you want it to do. Like for text, this would be passing in like a string value. For image, it would be passing in the image value. And number three, or the third point to it, is you do not have to memorize all the widgets. You can always check out the documentation. If you are not able to find what to use, you can always Google it. Like, I want to do this, and then Google it, ask a question or Stack Overflow, or reach out to someone from the Flutter community. And flutter.dev dash widgets, which we have already seen, has this catalog of commonly used widgets. So I'll come back to the project that I left running. So what it did was, it wrote down 129 files for me. I hope I'm audible fine. And check that once. Okay, I have a lot of questions. I'll come back to that. But over this, uh, it wrote down 129, and I'll open up Visual Studio Code. So VS Code is the ID that I use majorly. But if you're starting out with Flutter, I normally recommend using Android Studio. So there are two reasons to that. One is like it makes the whole setup very easy. So if you download Android Studio, you can quickly set up an emulator on it. And then secondly, it it has like better debugging. If you're not like a like if you are just starting out with development, it has like easier debugging as compared to VS Code. So when you create a new Flutter project and open it up on an ID, this is the project structure that you will have. So the project structure is something like, there are folders with each of the operating systems. So there is Android folder. Now this has like the Android side of things. There is a iOS folder which has like iOS side of code. And similarly, there is Linux, Mac OS folder, and web, and also a Windows folder here. And what you can do is you can go down to this folder called lib. So lib is the folder which we'll write code in. So when you're starting out with Flutter, all the code that you will write would majorly go inside this lib folder. It would be in a file called main.dart. So you can always create a new dart file. Like, click on create a new file, and you can create your own new dart file. But the first file, or the first function to get control, would be this main function. So if you are familiar with programming in any language, main is always the first function to get control. So whenever you, and the control would come to main, and it would see like what is there inside it, and then gradually, it will go down and run the application for you. So by default, the Flutter team has written some code, and what I'll do is, I'll run it on Chrome right now. So I'll run it as a web application. And what you can see is like there are all these different folders. So there is Android, iOS, Mac OS, Linux. So what the basic of this is, like, all the code that you'll write would be in a programming language called Dart. You do not have to learn Dart externally, but it is recommended if you know Dart before starting out with Flutter. If you'll take up a Flutter course, it will cover Dart programming concepts, so you don't have to worry as such. Uh, the code that we write, it goes inside this lib folder. So you'll write code in Dart programming language. Flutter would take this code and it would build it out for all the other operating systems. So Flutter has its rendering engine, which renders the application on the different platforms. Then you can also, if you wish to, make changes to the like on the operating system level. So let us say you are running a application on Android. Let us learning model, you want to build out an app for. So you can use some native code. So on Android you can make changes to the Android files, like maybe the build gradle, you want to add some dependency which is Android specific, so you can do that using a Flutter project. And similarly, like on the web, if you wanted to maybe go down to the index.html and change the title, so inside this HTML file you can do that. Like a description here, so as a metadata. So if if you are familiar with web development, the description is used when you're sending out a link. So it shows up on, like if you send it on Discord, it shows that description of that link on there. So you can edit and make these platform specific changes as well using Flutter framework. So this is the default application that any new Flutter project comes with. Whenever you create a new Flutter project, this is the default. A very simple counter application. You click on the button down here and it increments a number on screen. And we also have a app bar. So this is an app bar. On mobile, this should look something like this. So you click on the button and it should increment that. I'll close out the terminal. And what we'll do is, before we go into this, I'll have a look at some of the questions if there are any, then return to it. Okay, awesome. Is there any difference between Flutter and Kotlin? Yes. Yeah, there is difference. Like Flutter is a framework. It uses the Dart programming language to write code in. Kotlin is a programming language itself. And with Kotlin 2, right now, I think it's still in beta, but Kotlin offers something called KMM or Kotlin multi-platform to build out applications for iOS. Should I focus on designing the UI part using Flutter or make a complete application with the backend while learning it? Uh, what should I focus on designing the UI part using make a complete application with the backend while learning it? So with Flutter, I'll come to that part where I talk about some projects that you can build out using it. But since Flutter is a heavy front end focused framework, it lets you design these UIs, control every pixel on screen. I recommend starting out with some UI examples, so that would give you a sense of how widgets are laid out on screen and how certain things are done. So that would help you like get your hands on it. And then for the next part of it, you can try out integration with the backend like Firebase. There are open source alternatives, Upright, Superbase, and such. You can build out applications with that later on. But I will come to this question again. Flutter can make iOS and Android app. Why do many companies don't use Flutter? So the problem is, a lot of the established companies already are building out. They have their teams to build out Android and iOS applications, so they don't generally migrate. But there are also companies that on like they are good startups. So one such example that I have on my mind is Zerodha. Stock trading and such. Zerodha is like the leading startup. They have 2000 billion dollars in revenue, I think. And not 2000, I am not really sure about the revenue, but they are like a highly bootstrapped startup. They started out building their application in Android, but the problem with Android was that it could only be used by people who had an Android device. They thought that they also wanted to cater to the small audience of iOS users in India. So they decided to first go ahead with the cross-platform framework called React Native. But then, the build wasn't as good. So they moved to using Flutter and they use it for their Kite application. Still, there is an engineering piece by their lead developer on it that you can check out on the internet. Should I learn Dart for Flutter? Yes, you'll need Dart programming language to uh, work with Flutter. Okay, are Flutter mobile apps more lightweight compared to Kotlin or Java? Um, like the native applications are generally better suited for the platform. So if you're building out an application that is in Java for Android, it would certainly be more lightweight, whereas Flutter build might not be as uh, lightweight because it also packs certain other libraries in it. um, and it generally depends on how you build out your application. But depending on the use case, this might vary. Flutter apps might be a bit bigger in size. How many types of widgets are there in Flutter? So you can check out the Flutter widgets. So there are like not many types. The differentiation is very less, but there are a lot of widgets available to use. So I'll also uh, share this Flutter diff. So on the Flutter, there are not many distinctions, like only a few. But if you go over widget, so this takes you to a page called widgets library. And if you scroll down here, like there are a lot of widgets. So there are all these options, to try out for different things. So this also covers some functions, but there is like the stack widget, which is often used to lay out one on top of the other. So it can take in like one container, two container, and it will lay them out one on top of the other. A column lays out widgets like one under the other, but this is used when you are stacking on top of each other. And then there are other widgets like column. We already talked about that. uh, Decoration class is there. Box decoration to style some of these widgets, like if you want to add a circular border on the side, so there is box decoration for that. But what I'll do is, before I take up more questions, I'll come back to the presentation, just to finish this before we continue. One big reason of starting out with Flutter or learning it is definitely the community. So when I started out with Flutter, I think it has been 2.5 years right now. So there weren't a lot of people that were using Flutter. So like the people who worked with Flutter were generally quiet, so it was very difficult to connect or find someone who knew Flutter and ask them questions if there were any. But right now the Flutter community has grown a lot. So these are some of the pictures from FlutterConf India. That is like the largest conference that happened last year. A lot of developers came in from all around the world, and like these four are Flutter GD, so they are really cool people, and you can always reach out to them on Twitter, and they'll answer any questions you have. Uh, we also have like our community, the Discord community, and these are some of the mentors from that. So if you have question, like if after this session you decide to go ahead with Flutter, you run into something that you are struggling with, we would be happy to help you with that. Again, example of Zerodha that I mentioned, they started out with their native Android application, but they also wanted to cater to iOS. Generally back then, the people who had an iPhone were relatively less. I think which has grown over these recent years, like a lot more people are being able to afford an iPhone device. But earlier, a big part of India, they didn't have iOS device, so it only made up like 3-4 percentage of iOS users. So generally for startups that are trying to uh, also in save money and start out, like they have less funding, it's Flutter is a good idea to use, because that way they don't have to manage a separate team of developers to build out one application that will not be used by a lot of people. So that is why a lot of startups prefer it. But for Zerodha, they moved out to React Native, and then they switched to Flutter, which they use for their Kite application. So Zerodha has been using Flutter since its beta. Flutter is a very young framework. Like it isn't very old. So it only recently came into being. I think it is only like 5 to 6 years old right now. And this is like a simplified comparison of Flutter and React Native, which is not very up to date, so I do not focus on it much. But React Native has one very big advantage, is like it uses JavaScript as the programming language. JavaScript has a very good community built out, so you always have support. Like generally you have libraries and but with Flutter 2, uh, since a lot of it had like a lot of community support, therefore like now you can find libraries for everything. So if you are trying to do something, it's probably done by somebody else already. Again, with Flutter, just wanted to mention it, it's not about building for 6 platforms. So if I come back to my example right here, this right now is running on web, but I can also maybe close this, or I can run again like with macOS. So I can run this application as a Mac OS application also. I can also run it on my mobile device, so I can also launch it on an emulator, which I'll also do. So while it builds out this mobile application, what I want to tell you is it's not about building for 6 different platforms. The big advantage with Flutter is that using the same code, you can run it on these different operating systems and the underlying business logic. So let us say you write a function to add 2 numbers. So you're building a calculator app for Android and iOS. uh, this again has this launched as a Mac OS application, because you can see this top app bar which is there in a Mac OS app. And if you are like on a Windows desktop, so you can always run it as a Windows app. You can even publish it to Windows Store, so there is a dedicated guide on how to do that. But let me also launch the application on a mobile device so you can see. So I'll start out like a Pixel emulator. This is like the Android emulator, and this should take some time to launch. Okay, so this is here, and I'll launch my Flutter application on it. So okay, and now the Flutter application is building and it will run on it. So it's not about building for this 6 different platforms. What I was telling you that was, let us say you're building out a calculator application that you want to be on both Android and iOS. With Flutter, the advantage is that when you're running this calculator application, you build out a function called sum, so it adds 2 numbers. You can pass in like pass in the 2 numbers to it, and it would add those very simple function. But what you can do is like the function code would remain same across platforms. You can create a separate dart file that has this sum function. And when you're building out for Android and iOS, you can change the UI. So like Android could have a different UI, iOS could have a different UI, but the code to add the function would remain same, and that is like a very big developer advantage. You do not have to again and again do the business logic part. You can make some UI changes for the application to be suited for these different operating systems. So Flutter's framework, like this is the architecture. It uses Dart programming language, and you have widgets, as I mentioned. These are then taken by the engine, the rendering engine, and it renders it on the different operating system. In Flutter Forward, like there is a new rendering engine available. Since this is a Flutter Forward event, I think it's important to mention that Impeller is the new rendering engine that is written in-house by the Flutter team. So they used to use Skia, like it's still being used, but Impeller is available to try out. You can build out iOS applications that use Impeller as its rendering engine, and they'll gradually move to using Impeller overall. If you are like newbies in Flutter, this is just side information. Like if it doesn't make sense, do not worry about that. For iOS and Android, Flutter uses something called method channels, so you can interact with like iOS side of things or Android side of things. As I mentioned, like let us say you're building a ML application. So if there is like if the Flutter package not available to use, so you can write some Android level code, like create some functions there, and you can call them using method channels. And with that, we'll come to the part where we talk about the projects. But coming back to this application itself, so this here is the same application that we saw on web running on an Android emulator. So for Android device, again the process is similar. Like you can click on the button, it would increment a number. and the code is right here. So if I zoom in a little bit, what you will see is, if I close this also, there are different widgets available here. So one is the my app widget, and if I close this down, so this is like one state less widget, and then we have a home page which is like a stateful widget. So two types of widgets in Flutter are stateless and stateful. By state I mean data, so you can think of state as the data available to use. A stateless widget, what it generally is like, it's throughout its life cycle there aren't any changes made to it, whereas a stateful widget can have some changes done to it. uh, Let us say you have created a box and you want to change color. So for a stateless widget to do that, you'll have to, first remove that box that you had initially created, create a new box. But a stateful widget would allow you to change the color by just updating the state. So it would have like a color variable, you can update that color, and you would be able to change the state of a stateful widget. uh, you don't have to immediately learn about this, but inside this application, the number that is updating here is a stateful uh, element. So we can update this number by clicking on a button. And similarly, as you go out building applications, this would make more sense. For that to work, when you're starting out with Flutter, the first step is definitely installation. You install Flutter SDK. The second step is you can follow. So there are free courses available on YouTube that, if you can you can, if you like, if you can afford, you should maybe go ahead with the Udemy course, but the YouTube free courses are just at par. So when you start out learning, the course would cover Dart programming concepts, and it would also cover how you can build basic applications. Once you have built out like some applications, you have got your hands on coding, and like some of the widgets, okay, this is how text is shown, this is how images are done, you can go on to building projects. The first few projects that I recommend are generally UI clones, because that way you can get your hands around these uh, layout widgets, and how things are shown on screen the way they are. And then also learn about something called responsive design in Flutter. So since we are building for all these different platforms, mobile screens are generally, they have a higher height and then smaller width, but web apps can have like a big width and less height. So you have to lay out your widgets in such a fashion that it is responsive and maybe adaptive for the screen that it is on. The second thing that I generally recommend is trying out the local or native side of integration. So maybe learning how to access local files on Android or iOS, like mobile files, and maybe audio integration. And this would like teach you how some of the things work on the native level. Then move on to working with APIs, because for any developer, generally a lot of your work would involve APIs, fetching data, parsing it, and then showing it on screen. So you can build out like a news application using one of the free APIs to do this in Flutter. The fourth thing is again databases. You should know about CRUD operations in Flutter. Like you can use a lot of database options. So there's Realm by MongoDB. uh, it's a mobile first database that you can use. Then there's open source alternatives like Supabase app, right, that you can use inside your application. There's Firebase that you can use. You can always build out a custom backend using Node.js, use it in your Flutter application. So if you have been watching Shark Tank for a bit, there are a lot of startups that do this. Like they mention Flutter as their front end framework and Node.js as their backend. So this you do that. There are local databases that you can use inside your Flutter app like SQF Lite. Some of the operations to check out are like authentication with Firebase. It's very easy to set up. CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. Then how you can manage storage, and then some other features like remote config analytics, which are offered by Firebase. Then we move on to something called state management. So I briefly talked about what a stateless widget is and what a stateful widget is. If it doesn't make sense, I believe like this wouldn't immediately make sense. But there is this concept of state management. So as you build out bigger applications, there is a lot of data flowing through your apps, and sometimes you want to handle how would the UI look like for a particular data. So let us say you are building a app that interacts with the API. It is able to fetch data. The UI would show the data that is fetched. If it's not able to, for some reason, get the data, it should show like a error screen and such. So for that, we need to manage the state, and there are a few libraries or packages available to do that. So there's provider, riverpod, block, and different options. So after you learn state management, you can build out like a e-commerce app. This would involve like a database integration, to fetch this data of how to of this fetch these images and more, and then manage it internally. Like when you click on add to cart, it should manage that, and you'll learn about state management. And then third, you'll again learn about payment integration. How can you payment provider of Flutter? And lastly, Flutter is pushing a lot on game development. There is a engine called Flame engine that you can use to build out games with Flutter, and you can check out examples on that. This will teach you animation, physics. Lastly, talking a bit about internships. So Flutter, as a Flutter developer, let us say you start out with Flutter in your first or second year, and then you build out applications. You take up a course, you learn it, you build out a few apps, you have some projects ready. Would like What is the next step to that? So internships is a way to go. Like you can find an internship based on the work that you have done. How to find your first role? The first internship that I did was, I found it through found it through LinkedIn. I was following this startup for a bit, and when they opened roles, I applied to it. I got the internship. uh, I would recommend that, if you're learning Flutter, always learn in public. You're building out your projects, share your projects to LinkedIn and Twitter, put it up there, what you're doing. It would help you generally build your own personal brand, and it would also help recruiters find you more easily. So if like some company that you're interested in, they look up your profile, they'll know that your way around Flutter. So their chances are that you would get hired more easily. What companies hire? So a lot of startups are using Flutter in India. There are a few established companies too hiring Flutter developers. So for startups that hire, there's Zest Money. It's like a buy now pay later app. There are other startups like Front Row that hire Flutter developers, not generally interns, but you can get a full-time job as a Flutter developer. Cred had posted a few roles around Flutter. There are other startups like Yockit, which is like a big community app to help students study abroad that hires Flutter developers, and more such startups. So there's a complete list that you can just search for Flutter developers on LinkedIn and then check out the companies that they work with. And uh, for established companies like recently TCS had posted a lot of Flutter roles. Tata Digital has a few senior working for them, who are like Flutter GDs and such. And third question is it feasible to work full time as a Flutter developer? So just as in with any other tech framework, Flutter developers are paid at par, so you do not have to worry about being paid less or anything like that. But as a Flutter developer, I would recommend, after you're done with Flutter, you've built out your brand in it, you know your way around Flutter. I would also recommend, like, maybe you also learn other mobile frameworks, like maybe go ahead and learn native side Android of any, maybe Android like Kotlin, Java, or move over to iOS, learn Swift, and be better at it. So you'll be like a complete mobile developer instead of just being a Flutter developer. Lastly, for getting these resources, like if you are looking for a Flutter course, there is a free course by Vandar. So you can find using this link. So it's called go.learnflutter.in, and this would take you to a Notion doc. So it would open up my Notion right now. I will close this. And this has like the free Flutter course. So this is by Vandad. It's available on YouTube. It's completely free, 36-hour course, and I have referenced some videos. Like I checked out how introduction to block and such. So these are like really good videos. It teaches a bit slow, so if you are like, if you want to watch it quickly, you can, you know, increase the speed a bit. But this is like a very good course to learn Flutter, and it's available for free uh, on YouTube. And then like project based learning, so Rivan does a lot of videos. Rivan Ranawat, he's like he's, I think, still in his 12th standard. He's giving the board examination, so he has made a lot of videos on building out projects, like how to build an Instagram clone and such. So you can always check out his channel. And lastly, this complete Flutter bootcamp is the course that I so I had enrolled it in, I think, May of 2020. So this was the course that I used, and I might not, it might not be as up to date now, but it's like a good course to, you know, learn Flutter. And in regards of that, we are also like doing a giveaway, because there are a lot of events happening until 15 March. So we thought, like, for all the students that are attending these events, we would host a giveaway. So if you are interested, you can fill out this form. It involves like two Flutter courses, the same complete the Flutter development bootcamp that we would be giving away, and three mentorship calls with either me or with the friend who is, you know, co-sponsor. So you can choose the mentor depending on you. So to register for that, you can go over to adityathakur.in/giveaway and fill out this form, and we'll announce the winners by 18th March after like the sessions are done. So fill that out. And lastly, any questions? We'll take up the questions. Little, like, you can always connect with me. So I am on Twitter as Aditya Thakur XD. You can check out my YouTube channel and also join the Flutter community, which we have on Discord, to share any questions that you might have, even in, you know, development journey. If you're trying to learn Flutter, so take a screenshot of this maybe, and with that you can join us there. So I'll take up questions now if you have any questions. Okay, awesome. Coming back to the questions again, I think, should I focus on designing UI? I've already answered it. Like, the you can, you know, build out first UIs and then learn how to do the backend side of things. Uh, Starting my career towards Flutter, what should be my first project? So first project would definitely could be something as simple as, you know, building out a resume type of application. So it would have your picture, your name, and maybe some clickable buttons that take you to some links and such. That could be your first basic project. Then I would maybe recommend building out like a weather app using one of the free APIs available online. So that would be something that would teach you about JSON parsing and such. So that could be a second project. Then you can learn state management, backends, and build out more projects using Flutter. Okay. How many types of widgets are there in Flutter? I think we already answered that. Why we cannot use init state in hooks consumer widget? Not really sure about it. Like, I haven't worked with hooks as much. So I'll have to look this up. Maybe reach out to me over Twitter and we can look into it in depth. Is it memory management good at C for embedded system? Not sure about this either. Like, with memory management, I think that I know about compilation. Like, it uses ahead of time compilation, so has its own garbage collection, so you do not have to focus on that. With memory management, I like, since I haven't worked with C or either, because I started out with Java and then switched to Dart, so not sure how C does that for embedded systems, but also something that I can look into it. So I'll just copy this from here and look it up. So Google it later on. And Flutter is not lightweight Kotlin or Java. I don't know if that's a question or a statement, but definitely, like, with any native framework, if you'll build out Android application with Java, it would be better. if you'll build out like a Swift application for iOS, it would still be better. The advantage here is like Flutter can build out applications for both Android and iOS. So if you're comparing it for one platform, that wouldn't be the right comparison. But if you're trying to build out for multiple platforms, you have to look into advantages such as from the business side of things, like lesser development teams, and from also the experience side of it. With Flutter, you can quickly lay out widgets, see the changes on screen, and I think that is a big advantage to look into. Which one is better between Flutter and React Native? It largely depends on your use case. So how I answer it is, anyone in the Flutter community would tell you like it depends on your use case. So there was this company that had their website built out in React. For them, using React Native is the easier choice to go ahead with. So they already have their system in React, they are already using a backend with it. For them, React Native is the obvious choice when they're trying to build out an application. And Coinbase is a very good example of a company that uses React Native. Like Meta is also a good example, but Coinbase is like a startup that uses React Native for their apps, and they have engineering blogs on it of how they optimize certain things for their use case. So Coinbase is like a, it's almost similar to Zerodha. Like they allow trading, but they are a like Web3. They use it for tokens and such. So depending on what you're trying to build out, depending on also the internal surveys done by the team, so they can choose a framework better suited for their needs. Particular preference to use Flutter or Kotlin. Again, build out for one platform only. KMM is not that stable right now, but it is available in beta to try out. Uh, I would definitely go ahead with Flutter because Flutter would allow you to ship the same application to iOS. You can put it up on iOS Store, Apple Store for others to use. This was a problem because when I first started building out my this application in second year, I was building out a mental health application for a club we had on campus. So when we started out, we chose Android, native Android with Java as the programming language to go with, because a lot of people on our team knew Java. But again, the problem would have been, you bid out the application, but it could only be published to Play Store back then. And with Flutter, we could also build out the same application for iOS. And a lot of people on our campus had like iOS devices. So it was like the obvious choice to go with. Why Flutter lightweight? I don't really understand the question. Which one you recommend for backend? I'm using Firebase, but some said it is not recommended. Uh, with Flutter, I think Firebase is very easy, you know, to work with. It has very simple integration. You can just set it up in seconds. But the problem that I can see, like why a lot of people don't recommend it, is the pricing. So as you go on scaling, Firebase can quickly become very expensive to use. So if you're like early age startup, you do not want to uh, get into that, like have an application built out in Flutter. Try it out with Firebase for the MVP maybe, and then switch on to a custom backend built out in Node.js. That is something that you do. Also, like if you are a startup, there are a lot of programs. So Google has their like Google does this Google Startup Bootcamp, which I am part of, but they offer like credits to newer teams. So if that is something that interests you, maybe look it up. And then for enterprise app, what should I use, Kotlin or Flutter? uh, do not get the fascination with Kotlin or Flutter, because it depends on if you want to build for one framework or not. You definitely, your Kotlin apps wouldn't go ahead with iOS right now. So for an enterprise app, like if you are focused on Android users and want to give them a good native experience, go ahead with Kotlin. Backend depends on the needs. To start with Firebase is good as it is free. Yes, Firebase is very easy to integrate with, so good choice to start out with. What are the advantages of using Flutter for mobile development compared to other frameworks? Like very immersive toolkit. You can build out for every pixel. There are animations available to use, and You almost have the native iOS and Android experience with it. Between between depends on the use case. What is a good practice using Flutter with Dart on VS? What is a good practice? Like there are a lot of optimizations available VS Code, particularly. You can there are a lot of uh, like you can watch a video on 10 top tips with VS Code, and there are a lot of things to optimize your journal development experience, especially on VS Code. I use VS Code majorly for this reason, because I find writing code for Flutter on VS is a bit easier, because I've used Android Studio, I've used VS Code. But for new beginners, I recommend Android Studio because the setup is easier, and also the debugging part. So for a lot of new Flutter developers, like debugging is something that you might not be immediately good at. So Android Studio offers that experience very easily. What are limitations or disadvantages of using Flutter? One big disadvantage that I would say is, like, the same ML example that I would take up. So if you go over, if you want to use like a TF Lite model in your app, you might not find a good package for it. Like the package, two popular packages that were being previously used are not maintained as well right now. This is something that we are working on personally. Like a few of the mentors of our team have taken up to maintain that Kotlin package, and it's like still in the works, but it should soon be available. So that is a disadvantage. Then a lot of people do not use it for like 3D apps and such. But Flutter Forward, like at the Flutter Forward, they announced that they shared a 3D example of Dash, so it should also be available in stable soon. And other than that, like there could be disadvantages depending on something that you have in mind. You can't implement it in Flutter, you might have to go native and do it. So that could be something to look into. Also, app size could be a problem. Generally Flutter packages a lot of some of the libraries, and previously Jank was a issue which they have improved on a lot. Like iOS Jank was something that had been pointed out by a lot of developers, but it's improved right now. There are comparisons in their latest Medium blog that you can find of what Jank was some time back, but it's a lot improved right now. Do we need to code only once and it will adjust the code for different devices, or do we need to adjust the components according for different platforms and devices? So it depends on the application. So let us say, generally what happens is you're writing code and you have your widget, so it will show that widget on all six. Like I ran my application right now, it was working almost similar on the different platforms. But what you might have noticed is on the web, like it was a lot stretched out. The text was of the same size, but the app bar, it went on all went a bit longer. The bottom element was like a bit on the further side. But when you're building out your application, like these few elements would not be the only one. So let us say you have some text on screen, you could have multiple text. On web you would want them to be like side by side, like you have your first, second, and then third. On mobile this should go in a vertical fashion. You have your first box, then second, and on mobile it should be different. So you have to manage that yourself. Like you have to write code using maybe breakpoints, using media query, adjusting them using a layout uh, widget, or maybe like a builder or something. And you have to do that for the different platforms. How do you ensure that Flutter works well on different screen sizes? Again, you have, like, there are a lot of options available for it. So there are two types, there are two things in this. One is like responsive and one is adaptive. Since Flutter works on different devices, like you have your tablet, so your design should also adapt to that particular platform. So on tablet, you can have one list on the side and the other list just next to it. As on mobile phone, it would always be vertical. So you have to look into adaptive widgets, and for just look it up, adaptive Flutter apps. And quickly sharing my screen for this question. So there is this particular page on the documentation itself. So this is under, and you can go down to building layouts. Adaptive. So there are videos on this too, but what happens is like your apps need to adapt for all the different elements on screen, and there are options to do this. So you can use like flex and such. These widgets are available for giving you the size and telling you how would your app adapt to all the different screens that are out there. So under this you can always go down to layouts in Flutter, and okay, so this, I'm sorry, creating responsive and adaptive apps. So this has like everything. These are, you can either use layout builder or maybe like get the size of the screen that you're on. So media.query, it will tell you the size of your screen, and then there are a lot of videos on how to do this. So this is the boring Flutter show. So it covers how adaptive apps are built. So you can follow these videos also. And if you want this,
Uh,
um,
Excuse me, sir.
yeah,
I would like to mention that students can, I guess, connect with you on LinkedIn and Twitter, right?
yeah, sure.
So let's like take up one or two more questions, and we can wrap up this session. And other questions we can you can answer. Maybe if students can reach out to you on your socials, that would be well and good.
Awesome. Yeah, that would work because I think we also have limited time. Uh,
Yes.
okay. So I'll just take up a few more questions. Always done. I'll skip the ones that are almost repeating. Firebase or Realm by MongoDB. So MongoDB was recently shared the Realm, like the Flutter SDK 1.0 for Realm came out only recently. So I haven't tried it. Can't really comment on that. Firebase is easier. Can you please send the Flutter resource link? I'll drop it here. Okay, can we 3D game with Flutter? So you can build out games with Flutter. 3D part of it is only like with Flutter Forward. They shared an example which is I think not available in journal release right now, but it is available to try out. So they use something called they used a Blender file and they showed it how it would work on Flutter. But hopefully soon you can build out 3D games. It could be the first project, Firebase and Flutter integration. First project with Firebase and Flutter integration could be very simple, like a app that helps you, uh, manage your finances. Like you can add some, uh, tell it the balance, and then it would tell you. JSON View Pro extension. Can I use Media Query? Yes, you can use Media Query. Thank you for the answers. Welcome. Folder structure. Structure generally depends on the application. As you go around building bigger apps, I would switch to a feature based folder structure. I don't know if you're asking about the Flutter wala folder structure, yeah, Flutter project folder structure, because that generally involves the Android, iOS, and such folders. But you write code inside the lib folder. Then screen size you can different. There are some screen size issues depending on what you're running it on. So you have to adapt for that. Kotlin or Flutter better for ML. For I would say right now from what I am seeing, the Flutter packages for ML are a bit not very well maintained. Like you might run into problems with that. So Kotlin would be better. But we are working on one plugin ourselves. Like we're working on a federated plugin for TF Lite packages especially. So that should help you easily integrate TF Lite ML models inside your Flutter apps. So whenever that is done, would be happy to share it across on my socials. So yeah, thank you so much. I think loved the energy today. Thank you so much for having me for this session. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I am more active on Twitter. So Aditya Thakur XD on Twitter. You can always text me there. And yeah, that would be it.
Awesome. Also, I'd like to mention about the swags part that students were asking here in the chat as well. So I'd like to tell you that the criteria. So the most interactive students throughout the sessions that I've selected are going to get the Flutter swags that we promised you. So first is Aksh Kumar, second is Kanchan Rai, and third is Zaid Khan. So congratulations, guys. I've seen you that you were active throughout the session and loved your energy. I've also shared the links of our LinkedIn's. So make sure you're checking the general chat section. You are connecting with Sir there, also on his Twitter account as well. And over to Ronit.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for taking out time for the event. I hope everyone found it informative and got their doubts clarified. We'll have another session for Flutter Forward Extend soon, so stay tuned. Connect with our socials. The links are in the chat. And with that, we wind up the session. Thank you all for attending. Have a nice day.